And you people are victims of it, too. You know, you're reporters, and I understand a lot of you tend to be on the liberal side, but you don't want to get mugged and raped and shot and killed. And you all know people and friends of yours that happened. And so you can be anything you want, but you want to have safety in the streets. You want to be able to leave your apartment or your house where you live and feel safe and go into a store to buy a newspaper or buy something. And you don't have that now. The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, some of the places that you hear about as being the worst places on earth, much higher. This is much higher. The number of car thefts has doubled over the past 5 years, and the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Murders in 2023 reached the highest rate probably ever. They say 25 years, but they don't know what that means because it just goes back 25 years. Can't be worse. Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs and homeless people. And we're not going to let it happen anymore. We're not going to take it. And you people are victims of it, too. You know, you're reporters, and I understand a lot of you tend to be on the liberal side, but you don't want to get mugged and raped and shot and killed. And you all know people and friends of yours that happened. And so you can be anything you want, but you want to have safety in the streets. You want to be able to leave your apartment or your house where you live and feel safe and go into a store to buy a newspaper or buy something. And you don't have that now. The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, some of the places that you hear about as being the worst places on earth, much higher. This is much higher. The number of car thefts has doubled over the past 5 years, and the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Murders in 2023 reached the highest rate probably ever. They say 25 years, but they don't know what that means because it just goes back 25 years. Can't be worse. Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs and homeless people. And we're not going to let it happen anymore. We're not going to take it.
So we watched it together. President Trump wrapping up a lengthy news conference, declaring today Liberation Day in our nation's capital. And he promises to aggressively crack down on crime and clean up what he calls our once beautiful capital. The White House says these efforts are in line with an executive order the president signed in March to make D.C. safer. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here with my co-host Emily Compagno. Also joining us today, Carly Shimkus, co-host of Fox and Friends First, Lisa Booth, Fox News political analyst, and John Yoo, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, UC Berkeley law professor, and former Justice Thomas law clerk. Well, here is the president moments ago.
This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. Today, we're declaring public safety emergency in the District of Columbia, and Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's fantastic, is taking command of the Metropolitan Police Department. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly. You want to have safety in the streets. You want to be able to leave your apartment or your house where you live and feel safe and go into a store to buy a newspaper or buy something. And you don't have that now.
Look, the president really leaned hard on the big picture, because it's not just about Washington, D.C. It's about soft on crime policies across America. For example, he's going after no cash bail laws, and he's really hammering down on liberal prosecutors in Democratic-led cities like New York and Chicago.
We have other cities also that are bad, very bad. You look at Chicago, how bad it is. You look at Los Angeles, how bad it is. And we have other cities that are very bad. New York has a problem. And then you have, of course, Baltimore and Oakland. We don't even mention that anymore. They're so far gone. We're not going to let it happen. We're not going to lose our cities over this. And this will go further. We're starting very strongly with D.C., and we're going to clean it up real quick. very quickly, as they say.
John, that sounds like a shot across the bow. We are not going to lose our cities over this. This is more than just a shout out to the criminals. This is those blue-led cities and the way that they're doing business legally.
It's a good point, Harris. Look, the president can't do a lot about crime in the inner cities in places like Oakland, where I work, or San Francisco, where I'm from, or Philadelphia, where I grew up. These are places where crime has gone out of control. But the one place that the president can put law and order into effect is Washington, D.C. Our founders made the District of Columbia a federal city. They didn't want it under the control of Virginia or Maryland or any other state. It is uniquely the duty and responsibility of the president to enforce the laws, and those laws include the criminal laws for public safety in Washington, D.C. Now, he doesn't just need to nationalize the D.C. police and declare an emergency, which can go on for 30 days. He can send in federal law enforcement, which he's done. He can send in the National Guard. There's no governor to fight with, like the governor of California, to send the National Guard in. They're not limited to being there for 30 days. It's going to take time, but I think the president can use D.C. to produce good policies and demonstrate to the rest of the country how to turn around their crime-ridden inner cities.
So real quickly, so what we heard the president do today is he put the D.C. police under the AG Pam Bondi's control after announcing that the people from the feds will be in charge. That's what you're talking about.
Yes. Under the Home Rule Act of 1973, the president can take over the D.C. police, but that doesn't apply to the other law enforcement assets Paul was just talking about in your last show, the DEA, the FBI, and then, of course, the National Guard. Now, look, if you had to ask me, I think this whole Home Rule thing has been a mistake and a constitutional error, because I don't think it was a good idea for the federal government to ever give D.C. self-government. That was not what the founders intended. They wanted the federal government to always remain in control of the District of Columbia. So we're seeing 50 years now of misrule, misgovernment. The murder rate in D.C. has historically always been higher than in other cities in the country.
That's fascinating, Emily, because we're actually technically watching the rates of crime fall across the country. But in certain areas, it's the pure violence of the crime that's popping right now as an outbreak, coupled with people living on the streets and encampments in many of those blue-led cities.
Right, and if D.C. was a state, it would be the highest homicide rate per capita 4 years running. It's been, frankly, an abominable destruction of what could have been a very peaceful and, I think, example of how government should run. I think what I love about this, and I say it with a caveat that this is the first step, there was an excellent articulation today of exactly why this perfect storm has been created. And we saw firsthand as a White House press corps member talked about how he had been robbed at gunpoint by a child and nothing happened. The trauma and the stress are real, and there are lives we cannot get back, including that of a White House intern whose mother to this day says, please, President Trump, do something, right? So here we're seeing that. So we saw the articulation of why things have gotten to this point, and that's the failure of policies, the reclassification of crimes, activists, judges, feckless prosecutors alike. We know it, right? We talk about it all the time. So here we are seeing the president come in and do something, and then during this time, we'll set things right. But it's now up, I believe, to Congress and these cities to take this next step. Because the worst thing ever would be once this president leaves and then all the sand just goes back into the hole and it restores back to normal. So we need to set this precedent and then have it remain. So all these other blue cities that people have given up on have a fighting chance too.
Well, and the president said he's not going to give up. He said, we're not going to lose control. So all those cities had better wake up because he's serious about this. Look, I don't want to put our team in our control room too much in hot water here, but do you guys have from the U.S. Attorney of D.C., Jeanine Pirro, talking about the kids, if you will? Because coming out of what Emily said, I think, all right, let's watch this.
I see too much violent crime being committed by young punks who think that they can get together in gangs and crews and beat the hell out of you or anyone else. They don't care where they are. They can be in DuPont Circle, but they know that we can't touch them. Why? Because the laws are weak. I can't touch you if you're 14, 15, 16, 17 years old and you have a gun. I convict someone of shooting another person with an illegal gun on a public bus in the chest. Intent to kill? I convict him. And you know what the judge gives him? Probation. says you should go to college. We need to go after the D.C. Council and their absurd laws. We need to get rid of this concept.
Lisa.
Well, look, this is brilliant, especially that show of force that we just saw during this press conference, this Liberation Day for Washington, D.C. Look, the Democrat Party has become the party of crime and disorder, and the Republican Party is the party of law and order. And what President Trump is doing in Washington, D.C. will underscore this point, because just like how he was able to bring, we saw record highs of border crossings under Joe Biden and then record lows under President Trump in short order. That's what we're going to see in Washington, D.C. And we saw under the Obama administration where he appended the criminal justice system, where somehow it was racist to arrest criminals, which ended up putting minority communities even more at risk. And then what we saw under Joe Biden with open borders as well, just this lawlessness in the Democrat Party. So he's going to underscore this point and put these mayors in these blue cities on notice, because why won't they protect their citizens when they can? It's not an issue of being able to. It's an issue that they don't want to. And then also, I'll just go through. There's been a long list of members of Congress, staffers, and the intern that was also murdered that have been attacked. You had Henry Cuellar was carjacked at gunpoint, member of Congress. Congresswoman Angie Craig attacked in her apartment complex. Senator Rand Paul had a staffer that was stabbed as well. And then, of course, those two Israeli embassy staffers that were executed recently in Washington, D.C. I also will finally just note that even in 2023, we saw a bipartisan effort with Joe Biden to override a rewrite of Washington, D.C.'s criminal code that tried to do, softening on crime. So there has already been a demonstration of a bipartisan desire to get this under control.
Yeah, and the president also, during his remarks, read the long list of victims of Washington, D.C. crime. And the person that I'm thinking about today is Nasratullah Amanyar, who worked as an Afghan interpreter, came to the United States and was murdered as a Lyft driver, working a shift as a Lyft driver in Washington, D.C., which means that he survived Taliban rule, working for the U.S. government, came to the United States for safety, and then was killed in our nation's capital. And Harris, to your point, the person who killed him was 14 years old at the time, and he received a 3-year sentence. And it was actually supposed to be a 1.5 years, and the judge said that that was too light. So what President Trump and Jeanine Pirro are trying to do is increase that, because a lot of these young people are being used for their youth.
100%.
Because the older people in the gangs know that they won't get a severe sentence. So then you see these, not even teenagers sometimes, 12, 13-year-olds committing heinous crimes. I spoke to the mother of Eric Tarpinian Jackson, the congressional intern who was shot in June, and she talked about the horror of how young these victims are and how it felt to her to realize that her child, her baby, who she called a gift from God, didn't get shot one time but was riddled with bullets. So that's the reality that she's living in, and that's what President Trump is trying to stop.
Real quickly, John, we'll bring it back to you here. How hard is it to get that age lowered from 18 to where where the crime reflects that it needs to be?
Look, the way it is now with this special treatment of juvenile offenders is a product of this kind of woke revolution in criminal law that I think President Trump and the federal government are trying to stop. Now, President Trump and the federal government and states and localities can try to change the laws and say we're not going to treat murderers differently because they're 17, because they're 16. Some of the courts might push back, but this, I think, would be an ideal moment to try to go back to the courts and say the crime problem is so out of control with young murderers that we need to start treating people who commit adult crimes like adults.
Yeah, my big question is, do you really see a change in their behaviors by letting them go early on these horrible crimes? Like, do they get turned around by society, or is there the same rate of recidivism among them as there is for adults?
Actually, the data from D.C. itself is that the juveniles appear to have higher rates of going back to crime than the adults do, because they know they're rational, they're not dummies. They know they're going to be treated specially and get off on earlier sentences.
Well, and they have more years to do it. Yeah, because they're out.
Well, we begin with Alexandria Hoff with the very latest on this D.C. crime crackdown. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Sandra. Good to be with you. Yeah, the president said today that crime is directly impacting the function of the federal government. Therefore, it is his job to do something about that. And he did today by invoking Section 740 of D.C.'s home rule. What that allows the president to do is take control of the city's police department under emergency conditions for a certain amount of time. So for now, the Justice Department will run D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Force.
Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's fantastic, is taking command of the Metropolitan Police Department. In addition, deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly.
So in a lengthy press conference today, the president brought up several recent examples of random crime, like the 21-year-old congressional intern shot and killed by a stray bullet last month, and a former DOJ staffer who was beaten after defending a young woman from a carjacking attempt. Well, D.C.'s attorney general, he's disputing all of this, mainly the overarching theme of today's presser, by saying the administration's actions are unprecedented, unnecessary, and unlawful. There is no crime emergency in the District of Columbia. Violent crime in D.C. reached historic 30-year lows last year, and is down another 26% so far this year. So on paper, violent crime and homicides, they are indeed down. There were 187 murders in D.C. last year, down from a recent high of 226 in 2021. But numbers are still above pre-pandemic levels. And to boot, the D.C. Police Union has accused MPD officials of falsifying crime data to make, quote, create a false narrative of reduced crime. Now, next month, the House Oversight Committee, they're going to bring in Washington, D.C. officials for a hearing. They want to hear about legislative solutions that they have to crime in this city. Sandra.
All right, Alexandria Hoff live at the White House on that for us. Alex, thank you. John.
All right, Sandra, let's bring in the Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, who was part of today's announcement and will be part of the plan to try to clean up Washington, D.C. Mr. Secretary, good to have you on today. As expected, the Democrats are giving this plan the big raspberry. Listen to what the Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said right after the announcement. He said violent crime in Washington, D.C. is at a 30-year low. Donald Trump has no basis to take over the local police department and zero credibility on the issue of law and order. Get lost. I mean, it is true, as Alexandria Hoff was pointing out, that crime is down in Washington, D.C., still above pre-pandemic levels. But I don't expect that's much comfort to people like the parents of Eric Tarpinian Yakum, who was gunned down and killed in that drive-by shooting back at the beginning of July.
Well, that's exactly right, John and Sandra. Great to be with you. President Trump, compliments to him again for his leadership. These comments made by the other party are tone deaf to the actual reality of living in this city, and ask any young people that are coming here to try to work for the government. It's already one of the most expensive cities in the world, but it's also now one of the most dangerous cities in the world. And that does impair the function of government. President Trump has every right to declare an emergency. And how Interior is involved is because the U.S. Park Police, which is the nation's oldest federal police organization, formed by George Washington in 1791, has responsibility for the National Mall and all the triangle and circle parks that spread across the D.C. metro area, as well as the parkways that extend into Maryland and Virginia. So they've been on the tip of the spear. And I tell you, the rank and file of the Park Police, the U.S. Park Police, is so happy with President Trump because they're now having a leader that's willing to support enforcing the laws. Under President Biden in this system, many of these federal law enforcement agencies were hamstrung, and already since President Trump wrote an EO in March 27th of this year declaring that the D.C. was going to be made safe and beautiful, the U.S. Park Police have removed 70 homeless camps that were allowed to exist under the Biden administration and has taken down over 80 instances of graffiti across our beautiful monuments.
All right, Mr. Secretary, great to have you on the program. So get ready for it because those D.C. protesters are singing again. Listen here.
Deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., allowed to do their job properly.
You will see them flowing into the streets of Washington in the coming week. At your direction as well, sir, there are other units we are prepared to bring in. Other National Guard units, other specialized units. They will be strong, they will be tough, and they will stand with their law enforcement partners.
Free D.C., we shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. Free D.C., free D.C.
All right. right, well, eventually they got to the protesters there. Free D.C., free D.C. How do you respond to those that are taking to the streets to protest this move?
Well, President Trump at the press room at the White House today, potentially an all-time White House American record for most number of press that showed up. The press from around the world, the press that covers this thing, they live in D.C. President Trump opened the conference by saying, look, I'm sure all of you know somebody personally who's been mugged or someone who's been murdered, someone who's had crime committed against them. And the room was silent and nodding. I mean, this is not a partisan issue, and I don't know how the other party decides that they're going to make this a partisan issue, but certainly President Trump's on the right track. Police need strong leadership. Police need to know they have their back. We've defunded police in our major cities. That's been a campaign promise of Democrats, which makes no sense, because if people have a right in this country to have an opportunity to go out to dinner with their family, to have their kids feel safe, and particularly here in the nation's capital, where we have tens of millions of visitors a year from around the world that come to see our monuments, our free museums. This is the place where we showcase America, and we can't showcase America in a place where the police are not allowed to enforce the law. President Trump has the back of police, not just here, but across the country. And I tell you, the rank and file police are thrilled to have leadership that is supporting them.
If I could just add a personal note, Mr. Secretary, I've lived in Washington, D.C. twice, once from 1999 to 2007, and then 2016 until now. And it's probably where I'll stay for a number of years. Back my first stint here, I never thought about looking over my shoulder when I was walking around the city. Obviously, there were places that you would strategically avoid at certain times. But now, I mean, just walking to the post office across the street, you're looking over your shoulder. And here's what Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, said about crime in the city. Listen here.
I see too much violent crime being committed by young punks who think that they can get together in gangs and crews and beat the hell out of you or anyone else. They don't care where they are. They can be in DuPont Circle, but they know that we can't touch them. Why? Because the laws are weak.
So, I mean, you've got the perpetrators mostly being young people, as we saw with the drive-by shooting of Eric Tarpinian Yakum. It was young people who were going after a rival. That happens across the city. You could be walking anywhere in the city these days and potentially be mugged or even shot, as happened Mount Vernon Square, which wasn't far from where Tarpinian Yakum was killed, when that fellow was sitting in his car waiting for his wife to come out of work, and some crazed gunman just shot him dead. The thing with Washington, D.C. these days is you don't feel safe anywhere. How is this going to change that?
Well, I think we've seen President Trump, people said, how is the border ever going to be secure? And President Trump, unlike President Biden, President Biden said, oh, we need to have laws passed. We need more resources. President Trump got the job done. He got it done by leadership. President Trump himself is a walking deterrent, because people know what he says, that he means what he says, and he's going to follow up with what he commits to. And I know this both as prior as a governor, but now in Interior, in 41% of the southwestern border between the Gulf and the Pacific Ocean is Interior land. President Trump got that border shut down across the 5 law enforcement agencies that are covered in Interior. I got to tell you, all of those law enforcement agencies that work on the border, whether it's National Park, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Indian Affairs, they are also happy to have a commander-in-chief. And now right here in Washington, D.C., we got a commander-in-chief that says enough is enough. When we're going to be, we should be the richest, and we're the most powerful capital in the world. When people come to visit here, this should be the safest place in the world to match the vision for what we have for America. And President Trump's going to get that done.
Yeah, I mean, looking at 2024, over 2,100 violent crimes in D.C. In 2025. It's 1,586 so far, and it's hard to believe that there are some who are they're okay with that. We see you doing something about it, and we appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you both, because that statistics saying they're down in D.C., but we're still on the top, the global leader in the most homicides of any capital in the world. That's something that every American should care about. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ariel Bowser speaking about President Trump's crackdown in the Capitol. Let's see what the mayor has to say.
Announcement from the White House. So I'll have a short statement, and then we'll be able to take a few questions. So let me start by saying this. Washington, D.C. is a beautiful city, magnificent city. We're home to 700,000 Washingtonians. We welcome millions of visitors every year from around our nation and around the world. We have the nation's premier park system, fantastic public schools, including a free and robust pre-K program starting at age 3. We have a tremendous public transportation system, and we have hardworking people here who are raising families, starting businesses, and hiring workers. So it's very important to me that for all who live here and visit here, just know how beautiful our city is and how proud we are of all that we've accomplished here. We're unique in other ways as well. Though we pay taxes, in fact, we pay more than most states per capita. We're not a state. We don't control the DC National Guard. We don't have senators or full autonomy. Limited home rule gives the federal government the ability to intrude on our autonomy in many ways. I've said before, and I'll repeat, that I believe that the president's view of DC is shaped by his COVID-era experience during his first term. And it is true that those were more challenging times related to some issues. It is also true that we experienced a crime spike post-COVID, but we worked quickly to put laws in place and tactics that got violent offenders off our streets and gave our police officers more tools, which is why we have seen a huge decrease in crime because of those efforts. We have been able to reverse that 2023 crime spike. This year, crime isn't just down from 2023, it's also down from 2019, before the pandemic, and we're at a 30-year violent crime low. We're not satisfied. We haven't taken our foot off the gas, and we continue to look for ways to make our city safer. We know, however, as most have heard from the president's press conference, that he has prerogatives in D.C. unlike anywhere else in the country, including his authority given by our home rule charter to require the mayor, to require me, to supply services of the Metropolitan Police Department. And he also has control and the ability to deploy the National Guard. But let me be clear, as our home rule charter is also clear, and the president's executive order restates. Chief Pamela Smith is the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department, and its 3,100 members work under her direction. The Home Rule Charter requires the mayor to provide the services of MPD during special conditions of an emergency, and we will follow the law. Though there's a question about the subjectivity of that declaration. In fact, the chief has already provided a high-level liaison and point of contact with the federal government and made those initial contacts. The executive order is also clear that the president has delegated his authority to make requests of us to Attorney General Pam Bondi. I have reached out to Attorney General Bondi and hope to schedule a meeting soon. My message to residents is this. We know that access to our democracy is tenuous. That is why you have heard me and many Washingtonians before me advocate for full statehood for the District of Columbia. We are American citizens. Our families go to war. We pay taxes and we uphold the responsibilities of citizenship. And while this action today is unsettling and unprecedented, I can't say that given some of the rhetoric of the past, that we're totally surprised. I can say to DC residents that we will continue to operate our government in a way that makes you proud. We will balance our budgets. We will deploy our services. Our kids are going to start school on August 25th. And we will work with the federal government to do the things that they should do for our city, including making sure that we have the judges that we need, including making sure that all federal parks are supported, not just with law enforcement, but with other clean and safe activities, and including making sure that our economy is supported by rational federal actions as it relates to the federal workforce, federal workers, and federal property in the District of Columbia. So with that, I want to ask Chief Smith to talk about her interactions with the federal forces, federal police and law enforcement that have been engaged in the district.
President Trump putting police under federal control in Washington, D.C. following a string of recent violence. In May, the murder of this young couple outside the Capitol Jewish Museum. The man charged was accused of yelling "Free Palestine" as he gunned down this young couple, Sarah Milgram and Yaron Lashinsky. 19-year-old former Doge worker Edward Korestein, the victim of an attempted carjacking earlier this month. 2 15-year-old suspects were arrested, but we've heard what generally happens in that situation from Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. attorney now in the region. And this is a photo of Eric Tarpinian-Jackum. President Trump spoke specifically about this young man today. He was shot and killed on the street in June, just about a mile from the White House, right in the center of everything, in the middle of D.C., where all the tourists go. He was 21 years old. He was in the middle of an internship at a congressional office, obviously an honor and something that his whole family was excited about. He was caught in the crossfire, and they have not made any arrests, the police, in the case of the loss of this 21-year-old young man who is much beloved, obviously, by the people in this photo. And his mother, Tamara, joins me now. Tamara, thank you very much for joining us. Tell me what goes through your heart and mind as you watch President Trump talking about taking over control of the D.C. police and adding National Guard to the street after this incredibly tragic, life-changing loss that your family has endured in the loss of Eric.
Well, first of all, I want to say it was more than one bullet. He had multiple gunshot wounds. So it was not one bullet, which is even more horrific.
Yes.
When I heard the news today, and he mentioned my son, not by name, and mentioned the others who have been victims of violent crime, I was so happy. And I looked at Eric's ashes, and I said, Eric, you haven't died in vain. Things will change so other people are safe when they go visit DC or work in DC. And that's my goal, to make people safe. And they were all, President Trump was 100% spot on with what he said.
So in terms of this crime, this murder, and I'm glad that you pointed out once again that there were a lot of bullets in young Eric's body, which I can't imagine as a mother how excruciating that was for you. So it wasn't like he just got picked off by one stray bullet. It was a brutal crime that took your son's life, and they believe that he was not the person that they were looking for. It was another 16-year-old. What's going on with this investigation? Are there cameras in that area? It is in the heart of downtown DC. Is there surveillance video of what happened?
All I know is from what the Miss Smith said. I think she's the police chief. is that there are cameras from what I heard from her July 3rd interview, and they're grainy. That's all I know. I know nothing. I know nothing about what's happening. I don't know exactly how many bullets hit my son. All I know is from what the death certificate says, several bullet wounds. I don't know where he was hit, but I have an idea. I know nothing. And maybe that's for the better, so they can catch this person or these persons. I am praying it will happen. And all I can say is that I don't know if there's shot spotters in that area either. I know that cabbies had told me that is a dangerous area at night. They're afraid. When we were in DC to go ID Eric's body, I asked them to drive me by the convention center so I could see where my son was laying. And they said it's dangerous. The cab drivers and the Uber drivers, they both said it. It's dangerous at night. They said it starts about 9:30 at night.
So she said that, do you feel like you're getting enough feedback from the investigators, the detectives who are working on this case? Give me a sense of whether or not you're satisfied with what you're hearing.
I'm satisfied with Miss Janine Pirro. She doesn't pull punches. She's for victims. And I respect that woman. And I respect what she told me. It's going to take a long time, Mrs. Jackham. We're going to do our due diligence. And I believe her. She is for victims. And I did hear from Maura Healey, my governor, who used to be the Attorney General. And she said, Tamara, this takes time and you need to be patient and you don't want things rushed. And I agree with that. I think, we have to take our time, and we want a case so that somebody pays whoever did this is found, and that they don't get off on a technicality.
Absolutely not. And I can only imagine and how much patience it takes for you to wait. But you're right. Janine Pirro is very so competent and so on this issue in DC, and you can just tell that she wants so badly to make this a safer city. What about when you listen to Mayor Bowser and others say, crime has gone down in DC? This situation is being painted completely wrong according to them. What do you say to that? What would you say to her?
Well, I listened to her, and she didn't cite the 2024 statistics, which they say are 24% off. That they're not accurate, just like the gentleman you had prior to me.
Right.
The problem is we're from other parts of the country. The interns are from other parts of the country. They didn't know how dangerous DC was. It was like a well-kept secret, if you want my honest opinion. People come from all over the world. I think, these people protesting. I mean, who doesn't want their city safe? So maybe these people lock themselves in their houses at 4 p.m. They don't want to go out. I don't know, but I like to walk at night. Eric liked to walk at night and go get an ice cream at the wharf. People should be able to move around DC and not be fearful of getting shot at, mugged, raped. And I don't care about their statistics. You can skew statistics any way you want. And I was right. They skewed them in 2024. So that's what I have to tell her.
Tamara, we thank you for being here, and our heart break for you, the loss of your young son. I'm sure you were also proud of him. He was a wonderful young man, you can just tell, and he wanted to go to Washington and work on Capitol Hill, and that's a dream that a lot of young people have, and his interest in the government and the world around him is something that he should be remembered for. And we thank you so much for speaking with us today, and please accept our deepest condolences on the loss of your young son.
Well, thank you very much, and the family thanks you for being so kind to our family, and we just want DC to be safe for others and other interns and anybody. So hopefully this will all work out for the better of DC. Thank you.
Very strong woman, Tamara. Thank you so much. We'll take a break now. We'll be right back.
The big debate is here. Should teens then be charged as adults, even at the age of 14. Joining me now for that conversation is former Florida Assistant U.S. Attorney and Heritage Foundation Senior Legal Fellow Zach Smith and Woodson Center founder and president Bob Woodson. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us here today. The president is taking control over crime in Washington, D.C. First of all, before we get to the nature of juvenile crime, is that something that we should be concerned about? Is this the advent of authoritarianism, Zach?
No, absolutely not. And thank you for having me on the show this afternoon, Will. Look, the framers of our Constitution envisioned and contemplated that the federal government would maintain control of the seat of our federal government, that the federal government would have the final say on what happens in our nation's capital. And unfortunately, what we've seen too often over the past several decades is that local elected D.C. officials, particularly the local city council and the D.C. attorney general, have not done their duty. They have implemented policies, passed laws that have made our nation's capital less safe. And so I applaud President Trump. I applaud Judge Jeanine and others who are working to reverse that and really fulfill the vision that the framers of our Constitution had, that would ultimately be federal officials who help maintain control of our federal capital city.
Bob, before we get to the debate over juvenile crime and how to deal with juvenile offenders, the left is suggesting that crime in D.C. is at a 30-year low, that this is just an excuse for President Donald Trump. Yet you hear the stories from people that live in Washington, D.C. about their quality of life. So what should we take away from that? Do we believe the crime stats? I know that police departments are political, as often led by mayors, to make it look better for who's in charge. What do you make of the real state of crime in Washington, D.C.?
If you have been mugged or injured in any way, you don't care what the statistics are. As far as you're concerned, the injury to you is all that counts. And people in these neighborhoods are living in fear every day. And so to them, giving statistics of whether it's up or down is little significance. In fact, there are a lot of those statistics are influenced by the fact that a lot of people don't report them. They don't see a point of even reporting sometimes that we're witnessing.
All right, let's get to this.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, no, Bob, I was going to say, let's get to this debate over juveniles. Part of the solution package to deal with crime in Washington, D.C., it's been suggested that offenders as young as 14 years old should be tried as adults. Now, there is no doubt we have a problem with juvenile crime. I think on that, both of you agree. The question is, can this be solved by trying 14-year-olds as adults? Zach?
Yes, in some cases where that's appropriate. And look, that's not uncommon. Most states, the majority of states, allow for juveniles to be charged as adults in appropriate circumstances. The problem we're seeing in Washington, D.C., and I think Judge Jeanine alluded to this during the press conference today, is that the U.S. Attorney for D.C., who functions as the local prosecutor for the district, cannot charge juveniles even when they commit violent crimes, including carjacking in many instances. Primary authority for prosecuting juveniles rests with the locally elected D.C. Attorney General. Now, the locally elected Attorney General, he has a very radical view of our criminal justice system. He's pledged that he will never prosecute a juvenile as an adult, no matter how heinous the crime, no matter how old the offender. And what you're seeing as a result is gangs are going out recruiting very young individuals to commit very heinous crimes because they know under the D.C. Attorney General's prosecution regime, those offenders, if caught, will only receive at most a slap on the wrist. It's a terrible thing to see happen.
And what do you say, Bob?
I agree. I think the attitude of the officials in D.C. have been far too permissive. But also, D.C. is unique. Unlike other states, they don't have a county jail or a state jail. Once a child is convicted, and they go right to the federal system. I think we have to decide whether we want to be tough on crime or do we want to be effective in reducing juvenile violence. And I don't think we can be effective by remanding juveniles to the adult system. But there are some moms of 12-year-olds who were guilty of carjacking who even requested that the authorities arrest her son because she's lost control. And they didn't listen, and he wasn't detained, and as a consequence, he was shot to death. So on the streets, people really desire to have control, but they're there has to be a middle ground between charging them as an adult and also putting appropriate measures in to restrain them. And I think that I propose a third way of doing that, which is neither just incarcerating them as adults or being lenient either.
And I think the core issue is a conversation you and I have had on a couple of occasions, Bob. If you're going to solve youth crime, you've got to solve culture and family. Ultimately, that is the failing that allows a 14-year-old to end up on the streets committing adult crimes. Zach, Bob, thank you guys both for being with us today.
Thank you.
So nobody drives the day quite like President Trump. He announced today a sweeping crime and homelessness crackdown in Washington, D.C., temporarily putting the feds in charge of the Metropolitan Police for 30 days. He is also deploying 800 National Guard troops to the streets. This is all part of his plan to liberate our nation's capital after a string of violent episodes that have left residents on edge. There was that brutal attack on a former DOJ staffer, and just this past weekend, shots rang out at a big gathering of teenagers in the Navy Yard neighborhood.
This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. You're reporters, and I understand a lot of you tend to be on the liberal side, but you don't want to get mugged and raped and shot and killed. And you all know people and friends of yours that happened. This dire public safety crisis stems directly from the abject failures of the city's local leadership. The radical left City Council adopted no cash bail. We will bring in the military if needed. We're going to restore the city back to the gleaming capital that everybody wants it to be.
And here's a familiar face, U.S. Attorney for D.C., Jeanine Pirro, vowing to change the laws that protect violent young offenders.
We need to go after the D.C. Council and their absurd laws. The president is going to do everything we need to do to make sure that these emboldened criminals understand we see you, we're watching you, and we're going to change the law to catch you. These kids understand. I can't arrest them. I can't prosecute them. They go to family court, and they get to do yoga and arts and crafts. Enough. It changes today.
And D.C.'s Mayor Muriel Bowser responding to the president, making the case that crime is down from previous years. Meanwhile, some in the media are suggesting there's a racial element to Trump's crackdown.
They seem to hold their harshest criticism sometimes for cities that are majority black and brown. Do you see that, and what do you think that means?
I think that I have been dealing kind of with this issue for a number of years. It's kind of easy fodder on the campaign trail.
All right, let me start with my former Washington, D.C. Capitol Hill neighbor, Charlie Hurt. It's one of these things that when you live in that city, you think, you wake up and you look at the Capitol, wow, it's so beautiful, it's so great. But you have that awareness around you, and it's gotten worse since I left.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that since, if you look at the numbers and I'm always very skeptical about all the numbers, but just from 2012 to today, the murder rate itself has doubled. It's a serious problem. And it has been a serious problem for a long time. And I think that, and I love, and I agree, nobody can hold people's attention the way Donald Trump does. He used this press briefing to even pitch his new ballroom repeatedly. Yes. He never stopped selling. He keeps talking. He kept shouting out to the reporters in the room, I know you're all liberal, but you want to have a safe city. The place was absolutely jam-packed, I think, in at least some small part, because everybody in there does know the safety risks. And they do know people who have been mugged or shot or worse in the city. And the idea that you're going to hide behind this notion that, oh, this is an impossible problem that can never be fixed. And politicians, that's kind of like the last place they go when they don't want to face accountability for something, and they don't have any solutions for anything. They just say it's a problem that cannot be fixed. And we've heard this for years, for decades, about the Middle East. We've heard this for decades from both parties about the border. And Donald Trump came along and said, well, I'm not going to look at it the way you look at it and say that this is a problem that cannot be fixed. I'm going to actually try to fix it. And so then what did we wind up with in the Middle East? We wind up with the Abraham Accords, which I think are the most important steps towards actual peace in the Middle East that we've ever seen. And if he is able to extend them, they could become even more powerful in that regard. And then, of course, the border, he manages to walk in and fix the border in one day. So I'm kind of open-minded to the idea that, yeah, D.C. is a kind of a cesspool in a lot of ways. It's a dangerous city in a lot of ways. But I don't know, maybe thinking about it from a totally different approach might fix it.
Emily, you didn't have any type of coverage of this in April when the governor of New Mexico, who's a Democrat, called in the National Guard to help with crime in that city. And good for them, because they needed to do something about it. What do you think the legal issues that some of the Democrats are bringing up, saying that this isn't allowed, this is not constitutional? Is that going to hold up?
Right. No, it won't, because I think President Trump has been very clear that he's exercising the specific powers afforded to him there in Washington, D.C. And the mayor acknowledged in reaching out to the attorney general saying, I will be here to collaborate with you. Now, granted, she also pushed back on a lot of issues there, but I see him actually staying squarely within the lane that the Constitution afforded him and meant, by the way, Washington, D.C. to be, which was under federal rule. It was never supposed to be a state adjacent like it has become now. Frankly, that's certainly not what the framers intended. So how did we get here? Let's talk about it. So the laws and policies in D.C., like the Youth Rehabilitation Act and the age of criminalization being 18 and family court diversion, they have been totally distorted. The aim was to protect children from themselves. But we need to be protected from these children.
Yeah.
The rate of recidivism for them alone, for these kids, is almost double that of adult recidivism rates. And they are disproportionately committing these violent crimes. So the mayor says crime is down in D.C. But here are the facts. If D.C. was a state, it would be the highest homicide rate. It is 6 times higher than here in New York City. In 2025 alone, there have been 1,600 violent crimes and almost 100 homicides, and vehicle theft is up almost 600% in just 5 years alone. And a final note about the violence and the classification, because you hear a lot from the left when they argue or throw out criticism when they're not saying that things are racist or unable to be fixed. And it's always about, well, it's non-violent or it's a misdemeanor. And all of those classifications have been sort of summarily, magically introduced into the conversation, and it is not based in reality. Talk to any criminal law attorney or a victim or a family member and tell them carjacking's not violent, or these burglaries en masse are not violent, or stalking is not violent, or these burglaries are a misdemeanor, and they will argue with you every step of the way. So DC is the first city, and plenty more will take, I think, this example, which will be whip everyone into shape, the prosecutors, the judges, the law enforcement, get the kids out of this family court. Bravo, President Trump.
There's a young Democrat named Yemisi Egbobole that I've been getting to know a little bit. And
How's she doing?
She's great, and you're going to like her. She's probably going to be on your show sometime.
She's great.
She's great. And she wrote a piece for Fox Opinion today, basically, Harold, saying that Democrats should not downplay the crime issue, especially for minority neighborhoods, because it's on their minds and they would like it fixed too, and that maybe they're going to be okay with somebody trying to get a handle on it.
Right, so good to be back around the table. I try not to put race in everything. And in this instance here, Greg has said something many, many times before about crime. And we were talking about the border in the context about why does the issue have to be, but you're not at all, Dana, but why do we have to talk about race, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican doing it? No one wants their pocketbook stolen. No one wants their kids attacked. No one wants their sister or mom raped. And no one wants their grandfather shot while trying to go get on a train. I read a little while ago that Union Station in D.C. is a place where some of the National Guard will be deployed first. In some other neighborhoods. I've been in the train station early in the morning there in Union Station, and it's trying to navigate a crazy place as you're walking through there. I can imagine if I had my kids with me during that time. I think Democrats need to understand, and Republicans, but Democrats, just to put the politics on it, when President Trump talked about the border during the campaign, and Democrats, for whatever reason, some of the national Democrats and some big voices in the party, particularly the president and some around him, didn't seem to take that as seriously. That was an issue that hurt us, but more importantly, it was an issue that hurt the country. The crime issue, I heard Kash Patel today say during the press conference, and he was right, that the murder rate has come down. And Mayor Bowser has said the murder rate has come down. But when you live in communities or you live in neighborhoods where crime is taking place, those statistics mean things. But if you're worried about your kids, worried about yourself, worried about your families, you want someone, and you're expecting government to step up to the plate. I'd say one thing to everybody, New Yorkers, people live in Maryland, people live in Colorado, people live in Illinois, Florida, Georgia. We need to end cash bail. This no cash bail thing has not worked. Now, there were many who thought it might work because you're going to let people were going to jail to spend more, they were spending more time waiting for their trial than they were if they got convicted of something. But we're seeing now that the thing doesn't work. There ought to be a bipartisan effort to say, look, let's end it now. Whether you're a Democrat that supported it in the past, it just didn't work. And we ought to be willing to admit that. Any Republican or Democrat has an idea that doesn't work, just admit when it doesn't work. This one has not worked. We should get away from it. Two, our Fox reporter, I can't think of his name, young guy, I see him on Brett Baer's show a lot, and I've seen him on your show in the morning. He asked, I think, the first or second question of President Trump during the press conference. And I think it's a legitimate question. He said, Mr. President, will you be willing to take this to other cities? And the president said, yes. I hope that this template works, that we find a way to take it to Chicago and Baltimore and Memphis and Denver and Atlanta and other places that may need it, where you have communities that are wrecked by crime. And then two, he raised a question, which I'm totally opposed to the legalization of any drugs. And apparently President Trump and his team are looking at reclassifying marijuana. And the reporter asked, how do you reconcile that if people think that could be a gateway to some other things that these kids are doing? And I thought my former seatmate here and my pal here who talked about young people, I wouldn't be surprised if there were not drugs that are a part of that, as well as these young people are holding guns and handling guns and committing crimes with guns. It was interesting. I didn't realize you couldn't prosecute a kid unless they kill somebody with the gun or rape somebody with the gun. If they have a gun or they use it, that has to change. And I hope that the U.S. attorney there, my friend, is able to change that. And finally, again, I hope that the people who want to inject race in this stuff don't. Crime happens. I don't care whom it happens to. I'm not happy if it happens to a Democrat. I'm not happy if it happens to a Republican. I thought the president was trying to was cute with words about you liberals. Liberals don't like crime. Conservatives don't like crime. Blacks don't like crime. Whites don't like crime. Let's get rid of it. And that's why I was pleased and encouraged by what the president did today.
Greg, of course, you're going to comment on whatever you want, but let me set up one thing that occurred to me today.
Ooh, exciting.
Is that President Trump isn't doing this for himself, right? So he lives in the White House. He has car service through the Secret Service. He gets to go to Mar-a-Lago. He goes to his place, what's it called? The nice place? Bedminster. And so it's like he's wanting to make the city better for other people. And he's like, okay, well, I have the power to try to help. So he says, we might as well give this a shot.
Most of the big questions that he addresses are like that. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that? Whether it is the border or the Middle East or this, it's like he'll look at war and you'll think, oh, he's so simplistic about saying, what a waste. When he looks at war, he says, what a waste. All these people dying. They could be working and making money. That's how he thinks. And he's like, all these people dying, carjacking, that's bad. And all the academics are like, oh, he's so simple. Sorry, dude. He's right. You know what? I used to look at life, Dana, as something that everything would go my way. And when things go wrong, that would be the exception. I realized that it's the opposite, that life is actually a series of inconveniences. And when something goes right, that you should be grateful. That's Trump. You know, if you look at Trump expecting a smooth ride, you're insane, right? But if you accept his brash, confrontational, unpredictable style as the system, when you get these big gifts, whether it is the closed border or the Abraham Accords, you go, wow, that's something else, and you're grateful for it. Trump is the human embodiment of life itself. In that, it's challenging, it's unpredictable, it's a bit wild, it could be scary, but when things go right, it's wonderful and it's huge. I wasn't planning on saying that, but you asked me that question. Can I talk about crime?
Do whatever you want.
All right. The homicide rate is 6 times higher in D.C. than in New York City. It's 18 times higher than Havana. Carjacking is up 547% from 2018 to 2023. The D.C. police commander was suspended for changing crime stats to make it look like they had dropped. They would report something that involved a gun or a knife as a felony assault because the FBI uniform crime system doesn't report felony assaults. This is the nation's capital. This is where a lot of people come because it's our capital. It's like going to Disneyland and their oldest, greatest ride is a bottomless pit with spikes in the bottom. It's like you get there and you go, this is what the country's about? Now, imagine if we didn't care at all, if the adults just went home and got cigarettes or just left home, got cigarettes, didn't come back. that would be racist. But if you decide to stay and save the cities from this progressive ideology that only makes it unlivable for everybody but politicians, then that's racist too. So if you stay and help, it's racist. If you choose to leave, white flight, that's racist too. But why can't you leave if you're not wanted? How was that racist? Turns out that's the Democrat Party. People are leaving that. They're leaving colleges that are anti-Semitic. They're leaving cities that are dangerous. Turns out the intolerant few causes the many to leave. You notice this. No cash bail. You bring that up. You brought this up a lot. Probably, what, a dozen times in the last 2 years?
At least.
Everybody agrees. Why doesn't it change? We need to ask, why is no cash bail still around? Who is it profiting? Who is it benefiting if everybody agrees? And why can't we just stop it? There's something going on there.
President should executive order that too.
Amen.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have a press conference on that tomorrow.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.